Hi there, I'm Barb Mann,
And I'm Doug Weiss.
and we're here to roll out the barrel and share with you our experience of how to build a wood-fired barrel oven. And we are both part of Balsam, which is our place name located outside of Pine River. And we're building and creating a place of sustainability and peace and renewal, and all of that is in process. But yeah, we'll tell you more about that at the end. And at this point, let's just get into the workshop, and we're glad to be part of this virtual workshop through Happy Dancing Turtles annual Back to Basics event. So again, roll out the barrel, make your own wood-fired barrel oven. And we just wanted to make reference to a book that we used as our primary resource and reference on Build Your Own Barrel Oven by Max and Eva Edelson, published in 2012. So just wanted to let you know about that. We'll give you more information about that at the end as well. So let's begin. Wood-fired barrel oven versus a wood-fired brick oven. So I had wanted a wood-fired brick oven, I thought, for many years. And I bake bread, and I used to bake a lot of bread for farmers markets. And thought that a brick oven would be really ideal and fun to do, but didn't have a clue as to how to go about building one. When Doug and I got together and brought that up, and so let's figure out how to do that. So started doing some research and learned that there was this option of doing a barrel oven, and so then learning about the difference between the two. So with a brick oven, we learned that it takes 24 hours roughly to heat up to maximum temperature of 750 to 800 degrees, and how a brick oven works and bakes. The barrel oven, we learned, takes 30 to 45 minutes to heat up to temperature of 350 to 400, which most breads are baked in that temperature range. You can go higher, of course, and the barrel oven will accommodate a higher temperature, so that's not a problem. But that was much more to what my needs were and how I thought I would want to use this oven, and so that was very appealing. Brick ovens are typically also primarily for bread and pizza, and they provide a really unique, wonderful flavor for those breads and pizzas, and a speed of which they're cooked or baked. So that's pretty unique and cool. And I did like that aspect of it. The barrel ovens are basically used for anything that you bake in a conventional oven in your home. So it's an outdoor oven in our case, and is really kind of a nice feature, especially when we started considering how we might use this oven for more than just baking bread and or pizza, with hosting people here eventually one day past COVID. Brick oven is also typically a little bit more costly than a barrel oven, although we do know that you can spend as much money on projects as you really want to, depending on what you choose to do and materials you choose to use. And again, barrel ovens are typically a little less costly than a brick oven. And for both, there is a commercial kit available to help minimize some of your labor, but it does add to a little bit of your cost.
Yeah, I think typically you can buy these commercial kits, but they are expensive, and they're going to probably at least double the cost of the hardware, the iron materials that you're going to be using to produce these. So they're going to add to the cost significantly, but they are handy.
Yeah.
And decrease the amount of time and frustration that it takes in producing these things, maybe.
Yeah, and so in looking at pros and cons for each oven, really decided that knowing that there's this option of this barrel oven, that would really better serve our needs in multiple ways. So we decided to do that. So here we go. So starting with looking at some of the supplies that you need, and these are the basic things, right? We don't list all of the individual tools and all of that. Some of them that are unique, but not everything. So primary need is your 55-gallon heavy gauge steel drum. And we do know that they also come smaller size in a 35 gallons. So depending on what you're able to find and what you eventually want to end up having for size. We found one from a local farmer friend.
Yeah, so these are available. They're all over the place, and you can usually get them for free of charge. Many of you may have one laying around somewhere, at least if you've got some property. They're available. Try to find the heaviest gauge possible. Frequently, they've got some material in them, oil or something that you really don't want to have in them when you're baking. So you need to get that out. So if there's oil or residue or paint residue or whatever it is in them, toxic dioxins or whatever it is,
sounds awful.
Usually need to, well, it is, or can be at least. So usually if it's an oily residue, you need to burn the barrel out. So that's a good way to get rid of the residue that's in the barrel, and then wash it well to get this inside cleaned out, which we did with the barrel on the right there. That's sitting there. We did burn that out and then wash it well.
And it's okay if it's a little bit rusty. You'll see some rust spots in there. That's not a problem. Although you can sand them out as well. So one of your next primary pieces of parts is your double-walled insulated oven door that fits the barrel. And typically these are custom made and with a welder. And so we access Bill Dable, who's located outside of Pine River, west of Pine River, with Dable Welding, and he did a fine job and worked up all the specifications into his computer system and told us that anybody else that would like to have a wood-fired barrel oven made and constructed can access his services, and half the work is already done in terms of the specifications for doing the constructing of the door.
And this is the only really complex part of the metalwork on the barrel oven. This needs to be done by a skilled welder. It's a double-walled door, so there's two walls with about an inch space in between that allows you to insulate the door with a mineral wool, which this mineral wool is very temperature resistant to heat, so it's not going to burn up. It's not like a fiberglass or something that's going to burn or melt with high temperatures. So you insulate the door so you don't lose heat through that door. And it needs to fit tightly, and it needs to fit your barrel. Barrels will vary slightly in size and shape. Some of them aren't quite round anymore, and they're a little bit different size. So he will build, or you need to build the door for the particular barrel that you have. And this is, you need hinges, you need a handle. It needs to open and close appropriately so it seals tightly. This is a complicated process, so we accessed this Bill, who's an expert welder.
And then you also need a fire grate, which you can see in this lower right-hand picture right here. You might be able to find one, but because of the custom sizing of your foundation and how you set that up, typically it's also something that can be welded together. It's a little more simple process to create and build that.
Yeah, that's a easy process. You can make it out of all sorts of things. You can use just strap iron or whatever you have. We decided to use a couple of angle irons on the sides, and then just use rebar, half-inch rebar, cutting it in pieces and using that as the grate part of it, welding those to the angle irons, and that made a nice sturdy grate. Then the next thing, well, where is the door? Firebox door is the next thing, and you can sort of see on the right-hand picture there, we attached the door to the grate, bolted it to the grate, and you can make a door from scratch with a welder if you've got one. We chose to use a barrel stove door, which is a kit that comes to make a barrel stove out of, a stove out of a barrel. And this was laying around, so we used it rather than making our own door. And it works very well. It's a stove door, and it has a draft on it and fits tightly, so we just chose to use it and attached it right to the grate, so it worked very well. But there are certainly other ways you can build your own door. So.
Yep. And so you'll see this more specifically as we go through the how-to steps. You also need an ash box, which goes underneath the grate, and it's fit into a slot that you build your foundation and allow for that ash box. That is a little bit more involved for welding as well.
Yeah, it's just bending sheet metal,
yeah.
And then tacking it together, either bolting it or welding it together.
Yeah.
And it does take a little bit of work, but you may be able to do that yourself or have somebody who has a welder do that for you. It's a little bit more complicated, but not that bad.
Yeah, it works good. And then in your barrel, of course, you need to be able to fit it for shelving and racks in your oven. So there's fixtures here that, again, are welded in, which we had our friend over here, Bob Kevlin, do for us. He's a local farmer and good friend, and did a very fine job with that as well. And then a lintel.
And a lintel is just some type of metal. It could be angle iron, could be just strap iron that goes across the top of the door to lay the brick on. We'll see that later on as well.
And then you need lengths of heavy steel angle irons to help support the length of the barrel when it's set in place. So it ends up being minimum length of the barrel, whatever your barrel size is. So then just a quick note then here too, we mentioned and referred to the possibility of being able to purchase a kit. So this is a complete barrel and hardware kit. It's available through firespeaking.com. They're out west, I believe in the state of Washington, and actually they're made and put together by the authors of the book that we referred to. The approximate cost of that, including the shipping, is about $1,100. So just to give you an idea of that.
And just for comparison, our materials, which we produce ourselves, cost about $400 to $450. So significant savings doing it ourselves.
Yep. And then of course you need supplies for building and creating your supporting foundation pad, and there's lots of ways of doing this. And we actually use Portland cement, as you can see here, cement structure. But there's many other ways to do that, so we'll talk about that later. So we'll continue here with what else you need.
Okay, you do need to build an angled firebox so that the wood rolls in as it's burning, needs to roll into the center to maintain the fire. And there are a couple ways to do that. The one that's recommended in the book is in the lower left there. It's,
Here.
Okay, if you can see the arrow there, they recommended using fire brick and angling them up against the brick on the side, and then cementing them in place, and then putting sand or some kind of aggregate behind these brick. We chose a different approach that I thought would be interesting and maybe potentially better, and that was to use this insulating castable refractory, and it's called Castelite 22 Plus. This is a material that looks kind of like cement, and it comes as a powder in a bag. We purchased this from Smith Sharp Fire Brick Supply in Minneapolis. And you mix this with a small amount of water. It's kind of a thick clay-like consistency, and we used a form and then put this in and angled it up. It's really made for the floor of pizza ovens. firebox. And so it's very resistant to heat. It's an insulating type material, so it keeps the heat from the brick, surrounding brick. And it's a very durable material. Next thing we need is brick. As we'll see over on the upper right here, you need the brick to form the firebox and also the surround for the oven. And there are a variety of ways, variety of types of brick. You can either use just a clay brick or a fire brick. We chose to use a fire brick. It wasn't that much more important, expensive, I should say, than a clay brick. And it's a little more resistant to heat and a little better insulating properties. But you can use clay brick. They're fine. They're resistant to heat as well. And if you've got a source of used brick or used clay brick, you can really reduce the cost of the oven to get a cheap source of brick, recycled brick or something like that. As you will see later on, brick are a fairly expensive part of this whole project. And then you need this special mortar that's resistant to heat, and that's important, and it's also expensive. And we got both the fire brick and the heat stop mortar from Rock White in Baxter. Okay, we also need, anytime you have a stove, you have to have a chimney, and we used a double-walled galvanized chimney. Some of this this chimney will be exposed to the outside elements, so just a metal, steel chimney will rust, and so you should have a galvanized or stainless steel chimney. So we use a double-walled 6-inch pipe, and you also need a damper to control the temperature.
And a cap.
Well, yeah, you need a cap on the top as well. We don't have that here, but you should have some way of preventing water from getting down into the firebox itself and rusting the barrel. We talked about the insulation inside the door and the insulation around the barrel. There's a 2-inch strip around the barrel that needs to be insulated, and we use a mineral wool, which is made out of iron slag, so it's very heat resistant. It's not going to burn up. And then needs some supplies for cob.
So the oven is, once the brick is applied, then we close it in with a couple of layers of cob, which is what this mixture is here in the wheelbarrow on the lower right picture. It's a mix of sand, clay, straw, and water. And there's many recipes online that you can search out for these and figure out what works best for your needs. And Happy Dancing Turtle also has recipe and how-tos because they are known for their cob with their buildings. So next you need to look at selecting a location where you want your oven and accessibility, considering the weather and the elements and how that will affect the oven in terms of protection. Level ground is really helpful. Access to the kitchen in your home. So because our oven is outside, and we have seen how these ovens can sometimes be retrofitted into your home where the front of it is in your kitchen, but the back side is outside, which is a cool deal, but that was not an option in our situation. So having it accessible to your kitchen is a nice thing. Now we ended up locating it elsewhere because where the area closer to our kitchen was more hilly. So this was a nice level surface in front of the house, so it's not far from the kitchen at all, and it works. You want to consider wood source. You know, how far do you have to haul your wood for your oven when you're actually working with it, and then storing that wood. And then a shelter. If you're going to put a shelter over your oven, which is a recommended piece to add because the cob will wear from the weather and the elements. So when you're looking for your location, you want to make sure you have room and space enough for accommodating a shelter. It could be very small, just over the oven, or it could be much bigger than what we even did. It's pictured here. So those are things to take into consideration for location.
Okay, let's begin to just run through the steps of building this barrel oven and start with the pad or the foundation. And there are a whole lot of options as far as forming a pad or basic kind of foundational structure to set this oven on. And the book goes into a variety of those. They talk about setting just solid cement blocks down or using recycled stone or other things that, you know, you can just set this oven on. So it would be very inexpensive to set this oven. We decided to use a form and fairly thick pad of pouring Portland cement. And the reason we did that was that we live in an environment where it freezes and thaws on a regular basis. We get a lot of deep freezing of the ground. And so there's a lot of potential for this oven to heave and move. Even though we're located in sand and not in clay soil, there's possibility that this oven, if it were just setting on the surface on some concrete block or something, could heave, and Barb would probably not be very happy if the oven was no longer level when she tried to bake bread or something else in this oven. So we went with this heavy Portland cement foundation that's well below ground level. And I think this oven's going to stay there and remain level. Yeah. Okay, so the dimensions over on the upper left there, we'll go into these dimensions a little bit later and figure out why we use these dimensions. But we won't see again the dimensions for the ash pan. Thank you. I couldn't come up with that one. We used a 34-inch depth because that happens to be the length of the barrel. And then 14 inches wide was totally arbitrary. I don't remember if that came from the book or not, but we decided to have that 14 inches wide. And a fairly deep ash pan, and I know that was my desire because I don't want to be emptying the ash pan every time we use it. The next thing, let's see. Okay, setting the grate and the wood box door in place. So here we've set this on the foundation over the top of this ash pan area. And then we put this castable refractory in place, put a form in, and then poured the castable refractory in place. And you can see that it's kind of a porous type of material. That allows it to be quite insulating. It traps air inside, in between within the cement itself. But it's very hard when it dries. So we've got now this angled firebox formed, and let's go on to the next one, number 4. Okay, here is the fun part, and Barb and I didn't have experience with laying up brick. It's one of the few things that I hadn't done as far as I enjoy carpentry, but I hadn't laid up brick before. But so we were novices, but the next thing you do is lay up brick to the level of the top of the firebox door. And that involves cutting brick and then laying them up with the mortar. And you need a couple things to do that. One, you need an angle grinder with a masonry blade to score them. And then you need a masonry hammer to break them. But it's really good to have this masonry blade to score them so you get a nice clean cut when you whack them with the hammer. But it doesn't take very long to get fairly adept at cutting these, and it goes really pretty quickly. And then you put about some mortar on. Try to have about an 1/8 inch of mortar between the brick, and then use a level on each layer as you go around, trying to keep this level. And eventually, the goal is to have this barrel level. As you can see in the lower left there, we want to have this barrel level, and if you keep the brick level as you're going, it's a whole lot easier when you get to that point. And you can see on the lower right there that we've got our level on the barrel.
And it really does make sense to test it, level it each layer of brick that you do. So go all the way around and then test it both ways, vertically and horizontally, and it'll save, because you can adjust as you need to for each layer. If you're off a little bit, or tap it down a little tighter, or add a little more mortar to bring it up in certain areas if you need to do that. So it worked really well to do each level of brick and check it out.
Once you get up to the top of the firebox door, then you need this lintel, whether it's a flat strap iron or angle iron. It needs to be fairly heavy, 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch thick, but you need to span that gap across the top of the door, and then so you're able to lay brick across the top of the door. And then go ahead and begin to lay up brick from there, but really the next step, okay, there they are. Mm-hmm. But the next step then...
Let me just say something real quick too. So on this, just so you're not confused, this is the door to the wood firebox. So this box that's created by the brick going around is where your wood fire goes.
Okay. The next step, once you've got that lintel in place and that next row of brick, then you can put the barrel in.
Yep.
And so that's what we've got here on the right, but over on the left, it shows that you're putting the barrel, resting the barrel on a couple of heavy angle irons laid on edge like that. And this is where you're getting this barrel level and lengthwise. So then you want to cement these angle irons in place once they're level. And so now this is where that barrel's going to set forever. Then you're going to begin to lay brick up around, all the way around that barrel, up to where it begins to curve inward. And on all three sides, the front side remains open, but you're laying that barrel up, or laying it up within, on the front side, try to keep it a gap of about 2 inches around the barrel.
Of airspace.
Of airspace, right.
Mm-hmm.
So we're laying it up all the way around until it starts to curve inward.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay, now let's go over the dimensions quickly. This took me some time to figure out because I had wanted to figure out what size I should make the foundation. So we start with the width of it. The barrel is 23 inches wide. We need 2 inches of airspace on either side of the barrel, so that adds 4 inches. And then we have 4 inches of brick on either side of that, so that adds another 8 inches. If you add all of those together, you get 35 inches for the size of the oven itself with the brick. But I made the foundation 38 inches because we need some space to support the cob that's going to be placed around the barrel, around the brick, I should say, not the barrel. Lengthwise, the barrel is 36 inches long, and then there's a 2-inch airspace in back and 4 inches of bricks. So that adds 6 inches. So overall, that's 42 inches long. And I made it 44 inches, so we've got a couple extra inches again to support the cob. So the foundation is 38 inches by 44 inches.
This is a vertical cross-section image from the book, Build Your Own Barrel Oven. And I thought it was helpful to see the innards of how this actually looks. So here's your foundation down here at the bottom, and that ash box drawer. And then here's the door for the firebox. And the angled part, of course, is your bottom part of the firebox. And then building up, and there's your barrel and the 2-inch airspace around the barrel, and that's on the back side as well. And then this is your brick and your cob over the brick dimensions. And here's the chimney and damper. And when the damper is put in, you want to make sure that you're facing front, which we'll get to that. But that's just gives you another visual look of how this looks like and how it fits together.
Okay, well, we're starting to get there. We've got the brick built up to the level where the barrel starts curving inward, but now we want to take that barrel out. So it's supposedly level, and we're going to take it out. It is level. Okay. It is level, and that's important. Angle irons are cemented in place, so they're not going to move. And now we want to build a template because we have to lay the brick up on something till they dry. And so we need something to support the brick. But we need a 2-inch airspace all around the barrel. And so we need to build this template 2 inches bigger than the radius of the barrel. So the barrel is 23 inches, so the radius of the barrel is 11.5 inches. So we need to have the radius of the template to be 13.5 inches. So you can see that it goes right out to the brick on either side, and then it's 13.5 inches, the radius high. And this was made out of scraps of plywood and lumber that I had laying around. It really didn't cost me anything to build. It took, I don't know, an hour or something to build.
And the length is the length of the barrel, which was 36 inches, you remember from the previous slide, plus the 2-inch airspace at the back. There's no airspace in the front, it's level with the front of the face of the brick. So.
And this is how we chose to do it. There are other ways to do it, and probably several other ways. The book suggests using rebar and forming that into an armature, I think they called it.
Yeah,
and then
with hardware cloth over it.
Covering it with hardware cloth. That's certainly a way of doing it, though that rebar stays in place. One potential problem with that is that rebar, as the oven heats, can expand and contract and may cause cracking of the brick and or the cob. So we chose this approach, and it worked for us.
Yeah.
The other thing we did was to cover the template with newspaper. For a couple of reasons. One, we didn't want the mortar to stick to the template. We thought it would be harder to get it out. And secondly, we didn't want the mortar falling down into the wood box. And thought it would probably be a mess to try to clean out if it stuck to the wood box inside into the grate. Okay. The next thing we need to do at some point, and you should do that probably fairly on, because you need to remember to set the chimney in place with the damper.
Yeah, we had a little
all
incident
right.
where we put the chimney in place and got it plumb and everything and nicely vertical. Started laying brick over the top of the template and then realized that we forgot to put the damper in the chimney.
Damn damper.
The damn damper, there you go. And then putting this in place to making sure that that damper knob, which isn't visible in this picture,
because we didn't put it in.
well, maybe it wasn't in there yet. But anyway, it's like about here, and you want it facing the front of the oven, so it's easy to access it for churning when you start your fire and controlling that.
Okay.
So then you build the brick around the template, angling.
So then, yeah, if we've got that chimney and damper in place, then we bring the brick up and build it evenly around the top of the oven, around this template. And we found that through trial and error, if we had about a 3/4 inch spacing to the top, and at the bottom, the brick are almost tight together with a very little mortar between them. But if we had about a 3-inch uniform spacing all the way around, that brought the brick right around and brought them together nicely at the top. As I say, that took a little trial and error to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But what we were trying to avoid is having huge joints at some point near the top, or very too small joints or whatever. So having this 3/4 inch spacing was about right for this 13.5 inch arc over the top of the barrel.
Mm-hmm. And Doug made these little spacers that are 3/4 inch thick from some wood, and they work really, really well to help keep that spacing on the outer edge of the brick as we were going around the curve, well, equal for all the way across. So that was really great work.
And for me to know what 3/4 inch was.
Yeah. Both of us.
And then we need to fill in the backside with brick, and that takes a lot of cutting. You're cutting brick at angles, and the distance keeps consistently changing. So you're doing a lot of cutting, but by this point, you're an expert at cutting brick, so no problem.
As you can see how nice and smooth our backside bricklaying is. It's not, of course, and I hope if anybody's watching this that is a bricklayer that you won't be too mortified. But what we realized is that number one, it's going to be covered. You're not going to see the brick. And number two, when you go to apply the cob, it's helpful to have an uneven surface there, especially on the vertical side of the oven, that the cob can stick to a little bit more easily. So it did have its pluses in spite of looking a little haphazard there.
The more uneven the surface, the easier it is to get cob to stick.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, at that point, you need to give this oven some time for everything to dry, and then we're going to take the template out. And that template is just relatively hard to get out, surprisingly hard to get out. At least it was for us.
It was tight.
And so I had to take the plywood off, take the screws out and take the plywood off. Still was a bit of a challenge to get out. And obviously we were trying not to put a whole lot of pressure on so we would crack any of the joints or do any damage to the oven. But so it took some
Effort.
15 minutes or something to get that out, but
it worked.
It was doable. And then to pull the newspaper out was a bit of a challenge as well, because it was quite well stuck in there and we wanted to get it out. So maybe using something other than newspaper might be better. Next thing is to put the barrel back in.
Yep, insert it.
Okay.
With the door.
Yes, with the door on. And now you need to check the level of the barrel, both lengthwise, and it should be on, should be okay, because you figured that out already. But now you need to rotate the barrel so the racks are level both ways. inches,
Yeah.
let's say. And so once that's done, then you've got the racks level. And then you need to think about this 2-inch space around the barrel in front. And you need to do something with that. So we used, and this is what's recommended, this mineral wool insulation, this iron slag, heat resistant insulation that we put in. And you stick that into the about 4 inches, which is about as far as the brick go in. And it goes in quite easily.
Yeah, not hard. Then at the bottom of your barrel, so if you open this door, which we don't have a picture of it in the slide, but the bottom fourth of the barrel is actually filled with clean sand. And it's the full length of the barrel. And the purpose of that is to help evenly distribute the heat from the fire that's underneath. So instead of having the heat just directly hit the barrel with no sand in it and be more like a cook stove top, that sand helps disperse that heat enough to allow it to be a baking oven. So, and it works really well.
Yeah, we really want this oven to be heated all the way around, uniformly around the oven, rather than being heated through the bottom. So that's what the sand does, is to basically insulate the bottom of the oven and allow it to be uniformly heated as the heat goes around the oven and around the back of the oven, even around the top of the oven. So there's uniform heating of the whole oven.
So now we get to the cob part of it. It's very textural and moving with your hands and working with your hands and everything. So again, we're applying 2 layers of cob to this. Each layer is about 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. And that combination recipe of sand, clay, chopped straw, and water. I don't have the exact recipe here, but like I say, there's numerous recipes online. And the first layer is the toughest to apply. You have to really work with it when you're mixing in your water. And here it is mixing. We mixed it in a wheelbarrow. You want it to be able to form a ball that sticks together like a mud ball. And you can test how well it sticks together by throwing it onto a flat surface, a hard flat surface, and if it holds together, the consistency is good for working with and actually applying.
This is more art than carpentry or masonry, so
there's a feel to
Barb's thing.
Yeah, right.
And then putting it on is a matter of grinding it in. You know, at first it's like, this will never work, you know, and it's never going to stay on these vertical surfaces. And
you just have to keep working with it, and patience helps. We did learn that it helps to moisten down the surface of the brick. So there's a little bit of dampness there. Now, it doesn't need to be soaking, but it does help with the application of the cob to stick. We sourced our clay from our pond. Here's Doug digging out clay from the bottom of the pond. Which worked really well. It was a little bit of an effort, but it worked good. Had to let it dry out a little bit.
This is called hard pan. This is stuff that's 12 feet down here all over the place on this property.
Yeah. And we did have to let that dry out a little bit. So you have to plan ahead a little bit in terms of preparing your materials for making the cob. And here we are hauling some sand from the property as well to add to the recipe. The straw, we had to purchase a bale of straw from a farmer for $5. And the only thing I think I would have done differently in making the cob is to break up the straw a little bit smaller. Probably I broke it by hand. It was hard to do with garden shears or pruning shears, whatever. It was kind of tough to do that part, but if I had it to do over again, I'd make those pieces a little smaller. They were probably 4 to 5 inches long, and I would have gone 2 to 3 inches. I think it would have been easier to work with it eventually. But it does work, and it's not bad. So on our second layer of cob, here's where you have some options. You can dye it dye, stain it, excuse me.
Yes. She does with clothing and that sort of thing.
So you can use a cement stain to color the cob if you don't like the color of the clay, because it's basically the color of the clay and sand, which is this right here in our case. Some people have clay that's more red, but ours was more of this brownish tan color. And we wanted something a little bit different and to aesthetically blend in with the rest of the buildings on the property. So chose this dark red cement stain and just added that into the cob mix for the second layer, but only the second layer. It's not, there's some cost involved to that as well. So, and then when you're done applying all your layers of cob, you
and I would just note that putting the second layer on is a whole lot easier than the first layer, and probably you should let the first layer dry, but maybe not have it totally dry.
Right. No, it doesn't.
Or if it is pretty much dry, you can wet it down just a little bit before you put that second layer on.
Yep. So good point. Thank you, Doug. So when you're all done with your second layer, and most likely you'll have some cob left over, you can spread that out and dry it out and save it, bag it up and save it, because you might need it for repairing cracks or touching up later, as you'll see when we get to firing up our oven. So for a shelter over your oven, again, it's recommended. It's not required, but it is recommended. And if you're in a climate that you don't get much rain and you certainly don't have snow, then you may not need one, and that's okay too. But we did.
That's not us.
That's not us. We're in winterland here. So we designed a simple shelter that had a little bit of extra space because we wanted to be able to store some wood, which we are able to do to the left of the oven here. And obviously protecting it from the wind, snow, and rain, and what direction that comes from. So you can do just a shelter with no walls, but we have a lot of wind here at times when it's storming, and the snow and the rain coming from mostly the northwest. So we ended up creating a cordwood wall on the west side here and a little bit on the north side to protect, you'll see here, to protect our oven a little bit more. And it works beautifully. Our structure is about 8 by 10, and it's perfect. And I wanted work surfaces. So that's really helpful when you're dealing with food going in and out of the oven, whether it's bread or pizza or whatever. So there's 2 counter spaces on both sides. And I also thought it'd be nice to be able to let people sit and visit while you're out there baking or doing whatever, and or eating, of course. So we had a little bench put in as well.
And the cats really like it too.
The cats like it. They do. They get a little shelter. And so then also the consideration of your space available for the shelter size that you actually end up with, which hopefully you've thought about that at the beginning, as we talked about that earlier at the start. So firing up the oven, and we went by the guidebook, Build Your Own Wood Barrel Oven. And you start with building small, slow fires to help cure it. So again, you wait until the cob is mostly dry, and then you can get to the point where you start doing these slow, small fires. They're not cooking fires or baking fires at this point. And we did that about, I think we did 3 or 4 of those small fires to help this process. And we did get cracking, so obviously cracking of the cob may happen. That's not a surprise. They said that's almost to be expected, because you have different materials here. We've got steel, and we've got brick, and we've got cob, and there's different materials in the heat expansion that happens with that heating process. So we did get cracking in the cob, but it does not affect the function of the oven at all. The surface of the cob was not hot to the touch. It was very cool, and it worked. It still functions just fine. And here's where saving your cob that you have left over can be helpful when you want to go back and repair those cracks. And so then you're ready to bake away after you do all your curing fires, and then you can Again, when you start your fires up for heating your oven up, preheating like you would your indoor oven, you're just not turning a knob, you're building a fire. You still want to do that a little bit slowly rather than a raging fire to start. So you gradually build up, and it takes, yeah, we can get to that comfort level. I'm still learning to work with that in terms of how much wood and the temperature that I need and timing. So we thought we'd put together for you our costs and how this worked for us, because it's helpful to know if you decide to do this, what you're looking at cost-wise. And again, as we said at the beginning, you can spend as much money as you want. You can hire it done. You can, you know, use top of the line, whatever, in the process. So these are just our costs. The one area, I won't go through all of them, but the one area that we figure we could have saved a little bit more money was, like Doug talked about earlier, with sourcing the brick. I did do a little bit of searching before we started the project to find used brick or recycled brick from a demolition project or whatever, or somebody that had extra brick from a project. And I didn't come up with anything, or at least not enough of what we would need. It took 247 brick total, 4x8. What are they, 4x8?
Yeah.
To build our structure and how we did it. So we ended up buying it. But you can save. This is one place where you can save if you choose to do that. So yeah, the mortar, that high heat mortar, that heat stop mortar, is pricey, as you can see,
Yeah,
but it's
pretty
necessary.
amazingly expensive, but
yeah,
it's necessary for the
purpose of the oven.
well-being of the overall project.
Yep. So our total cost just for the oven, building the barrel oven and the cob structure around it and the brick and all that, was just $1,630. And then our shelter cost us just under $640. And again, you can do these a lot of different ways and much more simple than we did, but and we source most of our materials on site. So our total cost with the shelter was just under $2,300, which I think was too bad. And again, you want to weigh out, is it worth your time, your labor, and the funds to do this, and how you're going to use it. For us and our purposes here at Balsam Moon, it's going to serve us well when we're able to host large groups of people or gatherings of people of any size for baking not just breads and pizzas, but also casseroles, roasting vegetables. You can dry herbs and vegetables in there if you want for your winter storage and food preservation. So it's like a conventional oven. It's just outside and it's wood heated, which is great.
Well, Barb really likes to cook. So.
I do. So again, our primary resource was this Build Your Own Barrel Oven by Max and Eva Edelson. It was published in 2012. I got it originally out of the library. Felt like it was a worthwhile resource once we decided to do this, to just purchase one. And I found and purchased one online, a used book. But you can also access it through the printer publisher.
I think it's a very useful book. It presents a variety of options, from very inexpensive ways of doing things to relatively expensive ways. And so I think it lays out options. We use many of the suggestions that were in the book, but we did some of our own options as well as we presented.
And there's recipes in there too, so. And I think we need to keep moving along here. We're just finishing up, but we'll tell you a little bit about Balsam Moon. Our vision is to share an alternative, sustainable, spiritual place of peace, honoring the earth and all living things. We are 20 acres out here. We're about 10 miles west and south of Pine River. And some of our features are a full solar electric array and a solar furnace. We have a deep winter greenhouse that we can grow greens, cold weather crops basically in the greenhouse in the winter. And we're just in our second season with that, and it's working great. Plenty of vegetable and flower gardens in the spring, summer, and fall. Hiking trails. We have a labyrinth in the woods that you can walk. Simple lodging is available if you want to stay for a few days or whatever. We have pond and creek running through the property. We'll be offering workshops and on-site events. And we do an annual bonfire every year. This year, we're aiming for March, I think. Normally
hopefully.
we're aiming for January, but we're still trying to get through COVID stuff and thinking maybe March will work well, although it'll be outside. So, and just a few pictures of our property. This is our home, looking at it from across the pond from one of the trails. So we welcome you. Here's a way to contact us if you have questions. Doug's email and mine, our phone number, that's our landline. And we also have a Facebook page, Balsam Moon, if you want to learn a little bit more about who we are. And you're welcome to schedule a visit to come out and see our oven and discuss particulars if you really want to get into making one.
Yeah, we'd really be happy to talk with you about anything about the oven or anything else, but
Yeah.
certainly about the oven or any questions that you might have about building an oven or any other
Baking
questions
it or
related to
whatever.
the oven.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, ask me about baking in the oven.
He does help me mix up bread sometimes. So anyway, thank you for attending this virtual workshop at Back to Basics 2021, a new experience for all of us. And we wish you luck with your own oven project. Roll out the barrel. Bye-bye.